Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Cabernet and Pray. This is actually episode 30, which feels like a cool milestone. I mean, I don't know what 30 means, but whenever we get to a cool number, I feel stoked about it. We've been going for over a year, and yeah, it's been cool just to see how more and more people have gotten connected with this, and I continue to love the conversations that we have. And in conversations with you guys, I'm hearing that a lot of these conversations are actually applicable and helpful to everyday life. And so I love hearing that. And today is going to be super applicable. And I'm excited for you to get to this episode. Today is a conversation with Brit Baron. Brit is a speaker, storyteller, and author. Her latest book, Do You Still Talk to Grandma?, is out on October 1st. And that is one heck of a book title. I love it. Brit is on a mission to find out if we can disagree with people we love and still have relationships with them. What a great thing to work on applying right now. Can we disagree with people we love and still have relationships? Brit and her wife, Sammy, live in Los Angeles, California with their dog, Charles Barkley, just another great name, and numerous houseplants that they treat like children. Friends, you are in for a treat. Enjoy episode 30. Do you still talk to grandma?
I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happening in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I've been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on this show.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
All right. Well, welcome to a very special morning recording of the podcast, Brit Baron.
Yes, I am very, very excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, we are excited to dive into your book. Before we do, we're going to talk about what we're drinking. And like I said, this is a morning edition. Normally we record these in the afternoon. I'm going to go for it. It's 9:07 as I record this. I am drinking a white wine because that felt like I could do that. And fun fact for all of you listeners or watchers who are maybe judging me right now for drinking in the morning. When I was taking my wine credentials, they actually recommended you drink in the morning because your palate is better. So if you've ever wanted an excuse to drink wine in the morning, there it is.
Okay,
but today
that's news to me.
One. This is a Grenache Blanc. It's a 2021. And you may go, well, Grenache, if you know anything about wine, Grenache is a red wine. So if you've ordered a Grenache before, it's a red wine. But this is a Grenache Blanc, the Blanc being the white part. And so it's a Grenache made as a white wine, which is really cool. You can make almost any wine as a white wine, even if the grapes are red. And so this is just how they remove the skin contact. That's how they make this. This one's super refreshing. It's floral notes, got lime and lemon in it. And this is actually from Dobbs Family Winery. And Dobbs is the first one in Oregon to make Grenache Blanc back in 2009. So drinking a little history here. It's a fun wine. It's a good morning wine. that's how I'm getting started. Britt, what are you drinking this morning?
This morning I've got a 2024 iced latte with oat milk. As you can see here, we've got some still separation from the milk and the espresso shot. So I think that's intentional pour to really activate the tannins in the oat milk.
Wow, that was beautiful. That was a beautiful coffee description there. I actually have a friend who does a coffee podcast, kind of like talks coffee notes while they do it. So you sounded like that. That was great.
Yeah, I could go on that one and drink wine and just really mess up the whole system.
Yeah. Well, I'm a sucker for punishment, I guess. So I'll go for it. Okay, we're going to dive into your book. There is so many good things here. One of the things that just stood out to me is you refer to yourself as a storyteller. That comes across quickly in the book as you just have these great stories. And there's so many of them. I mean, the story that just sticks in my mind is you gluing your teacher to the chair. And I mean, I felt all the emotions with you as you told the story of, you thinking it was funny at the time, you retelling the story with mortification now. I mean, you just have a ton of these. You have a story of making a mistake on a photo shoot that literally I felt all your feelings with you and I wanted to die with you. You're that good of a storyteller where you're bringing the reader along. So I do want to just give a plug. If anyone's like, oh, I like a good story, Britt's going to give you tons of stories that you're going to be able to connect with. But what I also love about this book is you also have a lot of terms that you're using and words to describe things that are going on that may not be words that people normally think of or terms people normally think of. So it gives us kind of like a hook to hang these conversations on. And these are conversations that we need to have and are obviously very tricky to have. And you're giving us tools to do that. So my hope in going through some of your questions today is we can look at some of these quotes, some of the phrases you're bringing out, kind of give some tools for people in this conversation. But I have a question I ask each person when I begin, and you had a quote that just sets me up for this. So I'm going to use your quote to set up the question that I ask everybody. You say this: what we believe can and usually does change. If I went back and read you one of my journal entries from 10 years ago, we would both laugh, cringe, and probably cry. Again, a lot of people can relate with that. So here's the question. Britt, how has your faith changed over the last 10 years?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's probably a shorter answer of how hasn't it changed. I think everything from the way I understand the world to the way I understand scripture, I think everything has evolved. One answer that I usually say that feels most appropriate is everything about my faith feels less fragile. I think there was a long season where the way I was brought up and the way faith was introduced to me and spirituality and these ideas and these beliefs, it felt like whatever you do, don't look behind that curtain or under that rock, because it's going to tell you that something's not real and that this doesn't really exist and that this wasn't a factually true story and it's going to unravel the whole thing. And so there was a lot of fear around like curiosity. And I feel like once you blow that whole thing open and you put everything on the table and you still find some semblance of what you had before, well, now it's so fragile. And it's just true because I know it and I've experienced and I lived it. It's not true because someone told me it was true. And I feel like that is probably the number one way my faith has changed is it's just way less fragile and can't really be threatened by much.
That is so good. And I've done a whole podcast just on the fragility of Christianity because you're spot on. And as you explore a lot of the ideas deeper, you realize how delicate the system can be. And people have these beliefs. And if any one of them starts to fall apart, you have these huge crises of faith. And I love that that's been your experience of this stronger, just less fragile faith. And I think that's a goal for all of us. And you're certainly giving us ways to reduce the fragility. So if you're listening to this right now and you're like, yeah, I want that. I want a less fragile faith. Let's dive in. Here's how you do it. Let's get into some of the nitty gritty here. Okay, so you say this: our desire for and our tendency toward binary thinking and polarization is actually a psychological phenomenon known as splitting. Okay, so this is an idea that I love. Splitting can be helpful when we're trying to make decisions and trying to choose between things, but you're obviously talking about the downsides when we apply that to people. How do we work against this tendency? How do we say, okay, we have this leaning toward this idea of splitting things into good and bad, but when we apply it to people, it has problems? What have you learned to maybe like work through that better and not use it on people?
Yeah. I mean, so much of however we address everyone else is usually an insight into how we are addressing ourselves. And so if we are not capable of holding our own nuance, so if we believe that we are completely on the right side of the line every time, we figured it out, we're the ones with the answers, we're the ones doing it right, and we are just like, right, then we can allow ourselves to believe that someone is completely on the wrong side of the line and everything they believe is bad or wrong. When the reality is, if we can sit and hold the tension between the times we've gotten it right, the times we've missed the mark, the things we're unsure about, the things we are sure about, the ways we've changed, these things, then we can begin to do that for other people. I think our tendency to want to split is because it's uncomfortable to do some of the most important work that we have to do as humans, and that is hold two things to be true at the same time. And that is absolutely how we get out of binary thinking, is to hold two things as true at the same time, not as competing to see which one wins, just to say, I think a lot of us have done this, like with families, like with our parents. We'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for all these things. Like, I love my parents. Oh, wow, this was actually really kind of a hard thing that I'm undoing. And the goal is not to say which one of those wins. The goal is to be able to hold both of those. And that's how we get ourselves out of this splitting phenomenon.
So you're actually saying it begins with us, because that's a cool way to say it. If I'm on the right side of something, then splitting is always going to put other people on the wrong side. But if I refuse to allow myself to be on the right side and I acknowledge, I can be all this. And that's it. It reminds me when my kids were growing up, they'd always ask me, they'd watch a show or something and they would say, Dad, is that a good guy or a bad guy? And they wanted to know in the story, like, just tell me, is that guy good or is he bad? And I just remember like, there was something so simple in my kids watching these stories of they wanted to make sense. Like, which one does he fit into? And I remember trying to explain, like, there are no good guys. There are no bad guys. Like, we all have this in us to make good choices and make bad choices. And so I love that idea. Like, splitting begins with us. Like, you're not on the right side. Mm-hmm. Have you learned how do you keep yourself from thinking you're always on the right side?
I mean, it's tough sometimes because I'm like, gosh, I really do feel pretty right, And there are certainly moments where I'm like, okay, I think in this thing, in this way right now, like I feel confident that this is a good thing, right? That this is something I want to like advocate for. But I have to remember that I'm a whole person, right? And so it's this idea that like, oh, I did something that I felt like was right. I must be all right. Or like I did something that like now I'm a good guy instead of a bad guy. When the reality is I'm like, I could do something beautiful and amazing for the world and advocate for justice and liberation and truth and a beautiful moment. And then I could just like go and like just be a dick somewhere, like, and rude to someone on the street. Like there's not a moment of arrival. And I think I've had to get that out of my head of like, every moment I'm trying to choose what I feel like is the best next step. And I don't always choose that. And so if that's true for me, it's got to be true for everyone else. And I've learned to become very cautious of my own self-righteousness. Like the moment that I start thinking like, oh, those dum-dums over there, like they'll never understand how evolved we are over here. Then I'm like, oh, that's a warning sign. I need to sit with that.
Okay, so let me ask it kind of in the reverse. Do you ever see someone that is so out there that you want to just say they are the wrong side of the line? And do you try to caution yourself that way too, to say, no, they could make different choices? Or are there times you just go, no, they're over there?
I mean, there are times I do that for sure. I mean, every time I'm on the internet, I'm like, get out. That is a very real thing. I like to, the things I write about and the things I'm pushing, I'm like moving towards. I haven't even arrived at all of my own like things. You know, it's like people who write parenting books, they're always like, I can do this 1/3 of the time. Like this is the right thing to do. Like this is but you know what I mean? You're in real life. And so yes, are you kidding? It's 2024, it's an election year. There are people who I'm like, I can't even see straight right now. I don't even know what you're saying. But my hope and the thing that I keep trying to push myself towards is to know that at any moment, any person can choose a different option. And that's very true to me because that's something that I've done. So as wild as I look at people kind of on the internet, when I think about like me 10, 15 years ago, I don't know if I sounded much different from the people now who I'm like, they're too far gone. I'm like, no, I was too far gone. Like, you know what I mean? I drank that Kool-Aid. Like I was in it. And so to know that that's possible for me, well, then it's possible for anyone. And trying to stay close to that is a helpful tool. But sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, I need to log off.
Sometimes
I gotta get out of here.
You would say, you're over there. And
yeah. I need a break. Yeah.
Okay, here's another great phrase you bring up. In 1989, the psychologist Ari Kruglonsky coined the term cognitive closure. It refers to the point at which our brains decide that enough information has been gathered to make a decision. The concept of cognitive closure is necessary for our survival because our life is a never-ending series of decisions. This one got me reflecting for a little bit. I paused and I'm like, okay, this is an interesting concept because certainly we don't want to be open-minded about everything, right? Because, you know, we're not sitting around going, let's debate the merits of child abuse. Like there's topics that we're not open to, if we were to be honest. But there's other things that we need to remain open to and say, maybe we had closure a little too early on that one, just so that we had peace of mind, but we need to work through it. What have you found is a useful guide of when to close something and when to go, maybe I'm not there yet, I need to keep going?
Yeah. No, this is super helpful. And this is one of the things I say, and I'm so proud of this book and I love it so much. And one of the reasons why is it was so hard to write and parts of it were super confusing. And so studying this work and this idea of cognitive closure was super helpful because it really helped me understand how somebody gets to the point of extremism. But where it wasn't helpful was exactly what you're saying. How do we define that line? And so something that I like to think about and wrote about was how can we identify the difference between primary and secondary beliefs? And so I am cognitively closed on my primary beliefs. And those are simple, right? Like all humans are deserving of dignity. I want to work towards a freedom and a liberation that includes all people, right? Exist to reduce harm and violence in the world. And so these are primary beliefs. But secondary beliefs, so if we look at it as almost, I'm cognitively closed on the what, but I need to be a lot more open on the how. And sometimes I think we don't realize it, but we get cognitively closed on the what and the how. And those things change and evolve. So even your example right now, like, hey, we should be cognitively closed on child abuse. Even what that means, though, has evolved in our time. Like we would have said, you know, when our parents were growing up and they're like, oh, you know, you did something bad, I'm just gonna like literally like beat you with this belt. And that wasn't abuse. That was just like parenting, you know? And now we're in this space of like gentle parenting and all these things where we would say, no, that is absolutely abuse, right? And so I think we need to be open that the ways in which we engage in our primary beliefs in the world will evolve and should change. We need to remain open about those things, right? We all know people today who still like, no, that's just like parenting, like, you know, take those kids in the back and, you know, get them a few good times and that'll teach them a lesson, because they haven't evolved in their secondary beliefs of how we work this thing out. I think, especially in a lot of like social justice circles, I think this is very difficult. So we have these ideas on race and gender, sexuality, homelessness, all these justice issues, and we are actually like all want the same what, and we are arguing about the how. And it's really difficult, right? Because I think what I want to be open with is like, okay, I believe, there's something bigger than me that I call God is moving in the world and moving towards liberation for all people, and I need to be constantly open about how that shows up. And that can be difficult because your approach can change. 15 years ago, I thought it was showing up by me going to some other country and like handing people a Bible in a different language and being like, this will do it. Like this will save you. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, like that has expanded. So I think I'm cognitively closed on primary beliefs, but I'm constantly open on how they're going to show up and manifest in the world.
Do you think people, okay, so that's an interesting distinction, the primary, secondary. Do people's primary beliefs change?
I think they can. And I think they do. And I think when we talk about relationships with people we disagree with, I think community is on the table. Like community can be lost the moment our primary beliefs are misaligned. If that makes sense. So like if I say, now what I would say is I want liberation for all people. I think it probably was a primary belief at some time in my life that I want all people to be like saved through Jesus Christ. And that is like a big shift in primary belief. And so I think those things are hard. Primary beliefs are harder to reconcile than secondary. And I do think that they can change and evolve to a certain extent. I think once you get to like, okay, I want everyone to be okay, it's pretty broad.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking of it, because there is a big difference between you and I are debating secondary beliefs versus you and I are debating primary beliefs. The primary beliefs conversations are tricky, where you're talking to someone, you're like, I don't know how to move forward on this, and to use your example, I'll talk about like the theology of hell sometimes, and I'll try to explain to people like, hey, historically the church has believed, one of three general positions, and I'll explain it. And one of the three being that Jesus is going to save everyone. And for a lot of Christians, they'll be like, that's too far. And, one of the things I always find it interesting, I'll say, okay, I understand that may seem crazy, but would you want that to be true? Like if you could pick which of the three God's going to do, would you want the third one to be the one where God saves everybody? And to me, that is, even if you don't think the scriptures say that, okay, that I can understand that, but wouldn't you want that to be true? And then I found people that are like, no, I don't want God to save everybody. And that's when you realize like, oh, our primary beliefs are different here, because what I assumed was a shared connection isn't a shared connection, and then that gets really tricky. So I don't know if that's encouraging because I think there's a lot of disagreements on primary beliefs, but yeah, maybe we can help people keep working on closure on the right things.
The thing that I think about a lot is, and we have to understand that what we believe doesn't exist. Like we are not just a collection of facts, right? We're a collection of like the stories we've chosen to buy into and understand, and the meaning we've made in the world. And so a lot of folks, especially in the church space, whose primary beliefs exist in that way, is tied to other things as well. It's tied to psychological safety. It's tied to physical community. It's tied to their sense of belonging. And I think understanding that creates an empathy within us in the way we even approach that conversation. Because sometimes I think about, I'll be having a conversation with someone. Let's say we're having a primary belief, but in my mind, the question like circulating in there is, what would it cost you to agree with me? And when I know that price tag is high, then it creates a lot of empathy for me in moving forward in that conversation, because you're not just telling me you believe this. And sometimes I'm like, I don't even know if this is what you believe, but this is what you need to believe to be in this community. And that means everything to you. And so now I can understand sort of how and why we're having these conversations. I stayed in faith communities like a little bit longer, I think, than I should have, agreeing with their primary beliefs longer because I didn't want to lose all my friends. And that's just like a human reality. And so I have a lot of empathy for folks whose primary beliefs I wonder if are as solid as they seem to be when they're arguing with me.
Yeah, that's really well said. Okay, another great phrase you have: progressive amnesia. This was one I like. Progressive amnesia is the tendency to forget conveniently our own lapses and learning trajectories. It's what happens when we disconnect from our personal growth histories and allow ourselves to forget our own pasts. Okay, this one hit me, Britt, because I'm not great at this. I'll just confess that. In fact, my wife has had to help me with this. There's been a number of times, because I would say, the person I was, we'll say 20 years ago, what I believe 20 years ago, very different, very different. So I'm often talking to people who are believing, where I was 20 years ago. I know exactly why they believe what they believe. I used to hold those beliefs. I have worked through them. And now I look at them like, why can't you see this? I'm presenting a way better idea to you and you can't see it. And I'll get frustrated. And my wife has literally on numerous occasions had to remind me, like, Jeremy, how long did it take you to change your mind on that? And you want them to do it in one conversation. Like you just pitch the idea to them and you think they're ready to go. Like it took you years and books and mentors and, and all these conversations to get to where you are. And I never had a term for it, but it's like, that's progressive amnesia. Like, no, I've always been here. I don't remember what you're talking about. I love this. How do we work through this? How do we challenge our own sense of like, I never believed that. Like, just get on board.
It's so funny. And it is like, it's just the funniest phenomenon. And I have it too. And part of it, I think, is because when we learn something new or we evolve in a way and that feels maybe more true to us or more right, we can easily feel like we've always been here. But we absolutely have not. And it is so funny to me when we like look at people or look around and we can't even imagine why. And we get like so red in the face. But I'm like, we all sat there. We all didn't know something. The thing I talk about in the book is like, we've all watched a movie from a long time ago and been like, wow, that really doesn't hold up. All of our lives are that. And so I think it is so important to stay close to the versions of ourselves that came before now. And we have to understand them, and we have to have empathy and compassion for them, and we have to remember what it felt like to be them, because that is the only way we are going to approach change in a way that can bring them along. I think your wife is exactly right. Sometimes we enter into a conversation with someone like, I can't believe you don't know this. I'm giving you all the right facts, but I'm like, that's not what got us, right? Like, I remember before I came out, I thought for years, every single day, I struggled with the reality that I was gay. Like, I was in therapy. I talked to the therapist. I'm like in there crying every week for years, being like, is this bad? Am I okay? Am I going to hell? Is there hell? What's happening? For years, it was like every single day until finally I was like, okay, I think I am okay. And I think this is going to be okay. So then you're telling me when I tell my parents, I'm expecting within 5 minutes that they have the same arrival at a location that took me years to get. And it was me. Right. And so I think sometimes we forget the journeys we went on. And then we arrive somewhere and we present someone with like a 2-cent, like a tweet. And we're like, I'm like, this is years of our own development that we are trying to like bring someone along in a single conversation. And that's not realistic.
Okay, so I'm glad I'm not the only one who's struggling with this. You're raising the connection. This is really a key to empathy, because if we're bad at this, we will be less empathetic to the person, who's not where we are. If we're good at this and we go, oh yeah, I totally remember where I was. I totally remember believing that and what it took me. Now all of a sudden I can view you with a ton more empathy. That's huge. I mean, that seems like that is a game-changing tool, just to go, hey, the next time you're talking to someone who you think, I cannot believe you still hold this, idea or this belief. Think about progressive amnesia and can you create empathy? And yeah, even your story of like how long it took you. And then you need, but that's the hard part. You need people to get on board with where you are, even though they don't in that moment have the time to catch up to you.
Yeah, you need, and they can. And honestly, realistic, that is what my parents did. Like in my particular situation, they were they were so surprised. But they said like, "Whoa, like, we love you, and we're gonna figure this out." But I mean, they were like shocked, and then they did, and they went on this whole journey, and they found these like little parent clubs, and I mean, it's the sweetest thing ever. But there was, even if we initially agree, and I think so, something like we saw this a lot in 2020, where our nation sort of like blows up, and we see like the murder of George Floyd, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, that was wrong." And they had that initial step, but then there's like, okay, well, now here's like hundreds of years of like systemic and institutionalized racism to like catch up on, and those are the journeys that like there's gonna be like you're gonna be on it for a while, and there's so much empathy and like someone who's on a journey of learning, and there's like the people who I am most critical of, most easily critical of, however is the best way to say that, are people in the seats at conservative evangelical churches. And that is because that is the version of myself that I am most critical of. And so me continuing to find empathy for the version of me that like sat there and felt safe there and enjoyed it and felt like God wanted me to be there, like we were the one people who got it. Like, I need to continually cultivate empathy for her so that I can have it for the people in those seats.
Oh, that's so good. And I think you're onto something there. Probably the people that bother us the most are because they represent some version of us in the past that we're frustrated with.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Like, I could be that. I don't want to be that, or I can't believe I was that, and so we're hypersensitive, hypercritical. But, as I'm thinking, it's like the people who are going to be most effective in positively influencing others will be the ones who are patient, who can say, hey, I'm going to keep showing up with you. I'm going to keep helping you. I'm going to keep guiding you forward, in these conversations, helping you navigate it. And, if we're able to do that for others, we're giving them the chance to go on the same journey we've gone on.
Yeah. And if we remember the journeys, like when you asked the very first question, how has my faith changed? I think about like that. I can look now, I feel like a little bit removed from it. So I'm like, oh, I used to think this, and then I think this, and it feels great, But I'm like, if you really remember what it took for you to change your mind on, whatever it was, then you realize like, oh my gosh, like this is like many days of pulling on tiny threads of like a very, very well knit sweater, and I think if we can remember that, then we will approach it like a little differently,
That's so good. Okay, one more quote I want to dive into. And this one is another like, whew, this is tough. You say, you can either be right or you can be in the work. You can't be both. What I mean is that mistakes are inevitable, that they are necessary, and that you have to get it wrong to learn how to get it right. If you want to be in the business of growth and progress, you have to get familiar with the lost art of making mistakes. Nobody is interested in making mistakes, especially on things that matter. And if I recall, the context of this was doing anti-racist work. And so, especially for white people to enter into a conversation where we don't always know what we're saying, we're going to stumble. We're going to say, hey, I had good intentions, but wow, that was not the right way to do that. This is super scary for people. And as you mentioned, a lot of people just go, I'm not interested in, getting canceled or saying the wrong thing in the wrong way. So I'm just going to stay out of it. And then no, positive change happens. How would you encourage us? You seem to be comfortable in this space, probably more than most of us. What words of wisdom can you help people with?
Listen, we have to take what we know to be true and translate it to every area of our lives. Like, you have to make mistakes. No one just hops on a bike at 6 years old and just like rides off into the sunset. Like, everything we know about evolution, we know that we learn more through the mistakes that we made, and we can course correct and we can understand those things. And this is true for every area of our lives. And our ability to make mistakes well, I think, will be the defining factor in how much growth and transformation we experience in life. I know far too many people who are so afraid to have a conversation, a real conversation about any number of topics. And so they just disengage. And I'm watching as the world is literally leaving them behind because they just are so afraid to make the mistake. When making the mistake is the thing that creates us, like in us, the people we need to become to be a part of this transformation. And something that was really important to me is I was like, every single story I tell in this book that involves me, I want it to be one where I did not nail it, where I did not get it right, where I was the one who made mistakes, because these are actually all the most transformational moments in my life. It's not all the mountaintops. It's not all the times I did right. It's all the mistakes. And I feel like if we can remind ourselves the value in that and create a culture around understanding that mistakes are a part of our experience, and I think we're going to be so much better off moving forward. And I think the hard part is there's some real accountability to certain types of mistakes. And I think that's important as well. And if we want to be in the business of moving forward in transformation and maturity and liberation, mistakes have to be a part of it. They have to, or we're not actually moving. I think everyone who's afraid to make a mistake, they're going to be left behind. And that's, I mean, some rapture trauma for you, but, also left behind ideologically. Not like a pile of clothes in the living room and you don't know where they went.
Like Kirk Cameron left behind? Like what kind of left behind are we talking about?
I literally said left behind and I was like, oh, whoa. I'm triggered myself. But yeah, I mean, you just have to, like, if you don't want to make a mistake, if you want to get everything right, if you want to exist on the right side of the line, you may find a way to be quiet enough to never make any kind of noise like that, but you're definitely not going to be evolving.
Those are wise words. And also I think if we could just see all the faces of everyone watching, listening to this, they'd all be like, oof, like, yeah, that's tough. And one of the things you talk about in the section on mistakes that after I've read it, I've had this like come up. You say that it causes you, when you make a mistake and you realize that the next time you do it, you slow down and it causes you to go, oh, think that through. And I thought that insight, I'm like, that is so good because, we can just kind of go robotically through the motions of, I know how to do this. I know how to do that. And it's in the moment you make a mistake that then the next time you go, oh, slow down. And it's that thought process of, is there a better way to do this? Is there a different way to do this? And because I made a mistake last time, my brain is literally telling me like, bro, red flag, like rethink this before you do it so you don't make a mistake again. And I think that's the growth. It's not comfortable at all, but it's that little internal flag going, hold on. Like, is there a better way to do this? And yeah, I think you're spot on. Like you have to be willing to do this. And, depending on what the mistake is, to accept, accountability for it, which is also a whole nother element of that. But that's what growth looks like. And I think you're laying out a path that most of us intellectually can go, yeah, that's good. And then, it's like, who's courageous enough to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's simple, but it's not easy, I think. And that's good. I think if you're looking around and you're like, everything I'm doing just is like super easy, then great. That might be a season for you. But if you feel like you are just like trudging through and like really pushing it, then I think this is the season that's going to get you to where you want to be.
That's so good. Okay, I want to ask you a few questions that I ask each of our guests. And this can be like rapid fire, so you don't have to go as long on these, but always love hearing people's insights. And after we've kind of had a chance to get to know you a little bit, one of the things I want to do as we do this, and I have no idea this is going to go, but I thought as I was reading your book, there's a real life situation that came up, and I thought this would be fun to ask Brit about. Just help us work through something in real time before we get to these questions. Okay. So Are you familiar with the Dave Grohl saga that's going on lately?
I'm not.
Okay, so Dave Grohl is the lead singer of the Foo Fighters, and
Okay.
he was like considered one of the good guys in rock and roll. Like people have just have loved this guy. Well, just like I think a week or two ago, it came out that he had an affair on his wife with a mistress. She's pregnant, and so she's going to be having this baby, and like people were just like stunned, like, oh, this was like the good guy rock and roll, and he's just like everyone else, and all men are scumbags. I mean, like lots of reactions. And then what I'm watching is people wrestle with, but what about these decades of music that we have loved? And I thought about your book of like, do we still talk to grandma? Like just, when you have this moment and you bring up, some of your own friendships and things. So I don't know, in real time, like someone's going, okay, do I still listen to the Foo Fighters music when I know this guy made this bonehead mistake? How would you help people navigate some of that thought?
Yeah, no, this is a tough one, and this is a good one. And I think so much of it comes down to I am constantly pushing people back to themselves. If you feel like you cannot, with integrity, hold those two things to be true, then sure, don't listen. But I think so. I have a similar. I'm not like a huge Foo Fighter fan, but I have a similar situation in that like Harry Potter is like absolutely foundational and integral to like my experience of life. Like truly, those books and then the movies and then like it's meant so much to me. You cannot disassociate me from like my experience with Harry Potter. And J.K. Rowling is on a rampage. Okay, like she is like. I mean, not a single thing coming out of her mouth is something that I agree with. On the opposite, things I think that are very damaging, actually terrible, the worst. And so I hold this tension of like, yes, and like I am choosing to hold it to say, this work has been so important to me, and so it's just a part of my journey that I can't even untangle. And so. That to me, that's like something I have to sit with of like, these are still very, so like if the Foo Fighters, if you're like, this music is, it's just, this is my jam. This was our wedding song. This was like a song from my, whatever, like it can be that, and I think we can hold two things to be true of like, I really do not, appreciate what this man did to his family and thought it was different. And this is my song. Like
great jam.
You know what I mean? And that's the jam. Like Harry Potter just it meant so much to me. Like I feel like Harry Potter's mine now. Is like kind of like I'm like, that's me. Like, and I don't have to. It's the same with like Kanye West graduation album. I'm like, it's in my brain forever. And so I think that's a long answer, but I think ultimately, if you feel like for you, it's not something you can do with your integrity, then that's fine. But I think it's good things for us to wrestle with of like, yeah, what does it mean that artists are humans too? And what does it mean that their art has impacted us? And parts of it are like untangleable from our life and experience. I think that's a beautiful thing.
That's so good. And I relate with Harry Potter. I absolutely love the Harry Potter series. I read it every like couple of years. And I also agree with you. Like I've looked at J.K. Rowling and going, what are you doing? Like truly are you, I don't understand. And to the point, I don't understand how you wrote these books. Like I think the books are so good. And I don't understand how that's you. How did you produce that? But what I have found, like I don't picture her when I'm reading the books. I know that it came from her mind, but like I'm not mentally thinking about her or her involvement in it at all. So that one has been easier for me to go, yeah, she's out there, but like these stories are good. Whereas like I look at the Foo Fighters and I'm like, I would have a harder time, I think, now enjoying the music, knowing like, oh man, but this is this guy, it's his voice, So I do think there are times where maybe depending on the nature of the art, even might be like, oh, that one's easier for me to kind of figure out what to do with. And that one just keeps bringing that thought up. And so I appreciate you diving into real time. Maybe someone's dealing with their Dave Grohl sadness and you just help them get it.
Sorry to all the Dave Grohl fans out there. Yeah. I just found out who he is today, so it's less impactful on me.
Oh, well, I would put myself in the camp. I've been a Dave Grohl fan, and I just have watched, the internet blow up the last couple of weeks, and people like publicly mourning and like, what do I do? And so I thought, I'm going to ask Brit. Okay, so here we go. What is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
Again, I don't even know where to start. Gosh, on like practical levels, like I used to think I was straight. That was like a bummer to find out. Yeah, I used to think that, Christians had everything right and they were the ones who like figured out all the right things. I used to not know what a mortgage is. That's like a random thing that I keep thinking, why don't we teach that in school? I used to think that like paying a credit card off and then closing it would help your credit score. Those are all random things. It actually makes it go down, in case anyone else didn't know that. Like paying off your debt makes your credit go down. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why when you asked me that, those are the first things that came to mind. I was like, why don't I know that? Like,
that was a great answer, Britt. You covered so many different topics on that answer. That was great. Okay, let's see. What do you see as the main issues facing Christianity in America today?
I think the main issue facing Christianity is its misalignment from the people to the empire. I think that it is far too entangled. We're talking about, you said in America, right? Yeah, I think we are far too entangled with America and less entangled with the narrative of Scripture and the life and teachings of Jesus.
That's great. What is something that's blowing your mind right now?
Electric cars.
Oh.
Why are they so fast? Like, why are they so much faster?
I love it.
I don't know. I don't. Yeah, that's.
I just picture you just like walking through a parking lot, just in awe of like cars driving by you. Like, look at you go! Look at you go!
It is because you have like a Rivian, like the big electric truck. And it's like giant. Like I drove a 4Runner, so it's like even a little bit bigger than that. It's like huge, but it's like faster than a Porsche. And you're like, that's so fast just because it's a battery. I mean, yeah.
That's a great answer.
That has nothing to do with
No,
none of
I
that
love
content's
it.
in my
That's
book. Yeah, I'm not okay.
What's a problem you're trying to solve?
Oh my gosh. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? This is a great question. I don't know. I think it's hard because my initial answer is that I'm trying to get out of the business of solving problems. I think I have released a lot of responsibility for solving problems in my life. But there are a lot of tensions I'm sitting in, but I don't know that I would even say that I'm trying to solve them, because I feel like that complex is something I have to have had to put down. And so I don't know how many problems I'm trying to solve, but there are multiple realities I'm trying to hold right now. I think just even as the book comes out and logistics of that and tensions of that and my own feelings and tenderness towards it. Yeah, so that's not a good answer, but I don't know. I mean, there's practical problems, but
yeah.
What's
something
my
you're
dog has
excited about right now?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about the fact that my book is coming out, and I'm going on a book tour, and my wife is going with me, and we're going to be all over and visiting friends in each city too, and having this conversation is so exciting to me. Just being able to talk to people about how we move forward together is just the best.
Is this part of it more fun for you than the writing part, or do you like all of it equally?
I think I like them about this. I like them about the same, and they both push different parts of me. The writing is so isolated. It's so singular. It's just like you and by yourself. And this is like so involved. So it hits the introvert and extrovert side of me, but they both push beyond what I'm comfortable with, I think. So I like it.
That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to add that I have not asked you about? And you're like, wait, we got to address this.
Oh, I don't think there's anything that we miss that's huge. I think in terms of like wrapping, I do just want to say I think this can be a heavy conversation or can feel heavy, but I think it's just such a good reminder to ground ourselves, even in your very first question, like in all the change that we've experienced. I think there are people in our lives and people we look at and we don't think that they can ever change. And I think people looked at us like that. And so just remembering that we did it, so it's possible, is very hopeful for me.
That's so good. Okay, so people watching and listening to this are going, hey, I like her. This is great. How can they find you, connect with you online?
Yeah, so you can find my book, okay, I know the title. You can find my book.
You need to get this figured out.
Here you go. Yeah, okay. I got it. My book, Do You Still Talk to Grandma? You can get it anywhere books are sold. If you don't want to get it, you could go and ask your local library to carry it. It'd be very helpful. You can find me at Brit Baron on Instagram or online at britbaron.com.
Awesome. Well, Brit, this has been an incredible, enjoyable conversation, having some morning wine, discussing this book with you. I'm super stoked for your book. I think it's fantastic. It's a rare mix of the personal story that captures all the emotions of that, as well as I think it's okay to say heady ideas. Not like, you're going to lose people, but there's some meat there, that people are going to go, oh, I got to really process that. And you have captured them both in a way that I think will really resonate with people. So I'm stoked for more people to read this. Thank you for taking the time to discuss this with us today. And I love the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for having me and letting me drink coffee on the wine podcast.
Hey, we try to extend grace to all people here. So that's awesome. Well, hey, everybody, thank you for joining us for this episode. Go check out Brit's book coming soon, and we'll see you on the next episode of Cabernet and Pray.